Hello, everyone, and welcome to Heart and Hand the Rangers podcast. My name is Cammy Bell. I am your host on Extra for the week, as always. And it might be cold outside where you are, very icy, maybe a little bit snowy, but I can guarantee you a ray of sunshine with my guest this week, and that is the lovable, always happy, always cheery Caroline Morrison. Caroline, thank you very much for coming on, and as I say, providing some warmth to my heart and my ears.
Well, thank you, Cammy. What a welcome. That's so nice. And it's easy to come on and be cheery when the team are playing like they are right now. If you'd asked me on a couple of months ago, even a few weeks ago after the Hearts game, it might have been a different Caroline you would have got.
Yeah, well, it was a different Rangers, let's be honest. And
True.
I think that's a perfectly fair assessment. And we are recording on Wednesday night, just after Rangers 2-0 victory against Aberdeen at Ibrox. And I'm going to be honest with you, Caroline. We did our car pod, post-match car pod last night at Ibrox, as we always do on our Patreon site. And I was really pleased. I was actually really, I was really enjoying what I was seeing from a Rangers team that, when you think about our last four games, and if you go back and as you were kind of mentioning there, our run of form previously, would we have been able to get 12 points out of those four games? I think that I would have been looking to see what leg you'd been pulling. However, Rangers have been able to find the form. They have been able to find the consistency. And probably the reason as to why I was so happy leaving Ibrox last night was based more so around just being able to enjoy a routine win. And I'm not being glib when I say that, because routine wins have not been, easy to come by across the course of this season thus far. But it felt routine, which was lovely because there wasn't too much of a panic. The second goal obviously helped that, and going into half-time with a 2-0 lead, you're in a confident position. However, it just felt good to come out of Ibrox, not having to have that worry during the game, not being able to say, right, what would happen if we'd missed chances or, had to make a real meal of it. Rangers, I thought, went out, did a job really, really well in the first half, made it I was going to say made it easy on ourselves, but that's being too disparaging to the team. I think that we worked hard, we earned our lead, and we were able to provide some exciting football, which got us the result. We were able to control the game in the second half, and it wasn't hear 'em, scare 'em, oh God, we've conceded a corner, what could happen here, etc., etc. And that just felt nice for a change.
It did. And you know what? It's funny. After the Old Firm game, obviously, we're all on a high. But you do look at this fixture, and despite Aberdeen's despite how they've been playing recently, which isn't fantastic, you still look at this as a potential banana skin and you wonder, after all that hard work and after the high of coming off an Old Firm victory, it would be very Rangers to just, not be able to continue that on and win the next game. And some of the stuff that happened at the weekend, with Sterling, he just didn't want any noise that happened post Old Firm game to trickle into this game and, have anything go wrong. And it was just so nice, to have the start of the game that we did, to get that early goal and really to have it sewn up in that first half where you could just have a very controlled performance, very professional performance, and see out the game. Of course, it wasn't perfect. And, I know that last night you spoke about some areas that weren't perfect, but it just felt like a very calm, collected, professional performance. And that's so nice to see after what I'm sure was, a big performance, a lot of exertion at the weekend at Parkhead. So it's just nice, Cammy, and it's not, like I mentioned, perfection, because we have in some of our recent games, had to work really hard to see out a victory and kind of get the 3 points. There've been a couple of moments that it's been a little bit hairy, but that's what you're going to get across the course of a season anyway. And that's the type of games when we're not playing as well. And, under the last manager, where we weren't able to quite get past that, but under role, we are able to see out those games, and there's plenty of them across the course of the season. So that's the points you need to pick up to be back in a title race. And it's unbelievable that somehow we are, back in a title race. It's not something I thought I'd be saying even after the Hearts game. Like I mentioned, I really did think that that being one of the tests that we had upcoming over this period, and kind of seemingly falling at that first hurdle, what we've been able to do since and the way that games have panned out since puts everything back on the table. And without getting ahead of yourself, being able to face that first test of the Aberdeen game after another good performance just gives you a bit of belief and gives the team that belief that you can build upon it. And that's exactly what you need at this point in the season to create a run, to create some momentum, and also let your competitors know that we're serious contenders as well when we'd been written off long ago.
That's it, exactly, because there's you always want, and I think that because of how the season has started, and I'm not suggesting for a single minute that we do that thing that all football fans do. You finish the season and you go, right, it's going to be 6 weeks until the next one. We build up towards that, then everything kind of starts afresh. But you still have the lingering memories of, you didn't win a cup, or you didn't win the league, you didn't compete, and there was inconsistency. And obviously, for a number of years with managerial carousels that we've been on and inconsistencies plus the takeover, then we had what felt at the beginning of the season of that false dawn of a new takeover, a new head coach coming in and being able to implement ideas, and a lot of money being able to be spent in the summer window. And it kind of failed to pot. So you look at a lot of that recent history, and that's why you probably, right now, Rangers fans, the ones that I've spoken to at least, of course, it's the old football cliche, it's one game at a time. And of course, your eye wanders on the fixture list, but because we are in effect, a three-horse race, you look at your rivals and who they may be playing. Are they playing each other? What does that look like? I'm already kind of starting to look towards mid-February, because there are some fixtures coming up in there where you're thinking to yourself, well, if we can get to that point and we're still in a decent space, so we're away to Motherwell at Fir Park, and then we're at home to Hearts. If you could get to that time and you're still within a title race because you've been able to maintain the degrees of consistency, absolutely fantastic. But right now, the way how things are, and because that league race is so competitive, it can only be, let's just get to the next game. Let's just do that. And obviously, we've still got a couple of games left in Europe. Next week, we've got Annan. And you just need to be able to try and stay grounded as you best you possibly can. And I think what I've really enjoyed across the last few games is being able to see those green shoots of improvement that Danny Rule has come in and he's more or less just said, we need to more or less forget about what's happened thus far, which is incredibly difficult to do when you're already a few months into the season. And he's had to probably strip a lot of it back to basics. You're seeing that a lot more now, I think, in terms of performances from Yusuf Chermiti, who, again, on Tuesday night, I thought was really strong, really powerful, physical. He obviously gets his brace at Parkhead at the weekend there, but he's playing with far more confidence. And you can start to see some of that within some of the other players, that maybe it's not about overcomplicating anymore. Maybe it is about taking some steps back in order to take steps forward. And if the team can do that collectively, then it sets up a good bit of momentum. We'll talk later on about how we supplement the team. But we have to have a core basic of the group that have to be able to see those steps of improvement. And fundamentally, Caroline, as we've known for in our time supporting this club, winning breeds confidence. Results breed confidence. And as 3 points is always going to be the most important thing, we can deal with good performances as well. But as long as we play badly and win, there's not going to be too many Rangers fans who'll complain about that.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that the players, but in particular Danny Role, has done well, which is just aim for that slight improvement game on game. And it's not going to be an overnight thing. It is just those incremental gains, for want of a better phrase. But that is exactly what I think he's done very well. And it's just starting to establish some better processes, some better kind of set plays, whatever it might be, working with the set coach and improving that, working on some of our movement, for example, working on defensively, keeping those clean sheets, which were a rarity in that first part of the season, but that then allowing you to build upon that. And we're still not creating a terrible amount of goals. We're getting better in that respect. Not a terrible lot from open play, but at least if you are keeping that clean sheet, or at least not letting in goals to the extent that we were, a couple of months ago, then it's not so big a deal then if you're not necessarily firing on all cylinders at the other end of the pitch. Actually, you might only need 1 or 2 goals to get those 3 points. And it's just those little things that I think he's worked on. And also with a couple of key players, but across the team, but you really notice it with key players is what I mean. The improvements, maybe just playing them in a slightly different position, maybe just asking them to do something slightly differently. You can see players flourish and just really develop and step into a role in a way we've not seen before. And actually what I noticed last night, I was kind of considering his man management as well. So we've heard from where he's been at other teams how much players under him value what he is as a man manager and how he treats his players and how he kind of values his squad. And I was reflecting on that last night. At half time, we'd largely, managed the game. And he made some very clever changes. I think introducing Asgard, who'd had a terrible game at the weekend. And actually, I thought Asgard did okay in the second half. I wasn't terribly pleased to see him come on. But actually, I thought just being able to bring him back into the team and allow him to build back up some confidence, whether he's a player with us for very long or not, that's just the right thing to do if you're managing a squad of players and getting the most out of everyone, even if they're not going to be in your long-term plans. And also allowing Chermiti and Barron to have their moment and have their thanks from the fans. In Chermiti's case, for, like you say, the brace at the weekend, after what was a really difficult start to his career. But in Barron's case, who has worked extremely hard in the last few games in particular, he has run himself ragged. He's been doing a lot of the real hard, dirty work on behalf of the team and playing against his former team, who always give him a hard time, and their fans really do have a go at him, allowing him to take some of the plaudits last night for a game that we've won comfortably and give him that moment. It was actually a really smart thing for Thinkful to do. So the longer he's with us, obviously results really, really help, but it's little things like that you recognise and you go, I hope that's indicative, again, that we've got a really good manager on our hands, and it's a nice positive sign to take into the second half of the season.
Yeah, it's funny because I was actually doing a bit of reflecting earlier on today, having had the chance to be able to watch some of the game back. And I said at Ibrox on Tuesday night, I was concerned that we made some of the substitutes a little bit too early in the second half for my liking. And that's transactional because that's at the game, that's what you're worried about. Obviously, the game is still live at that stage. And it will be a surprise to no one listening to this about how poor the squad is in terms of adequate replacements, being able to try and get like for like. We're for want of a better term, we're in a bit of a kind of crisis situation where we have specific positions in the team that there is no competition for. Left back being one of the most obvious ones. And yes, you can do the old, square peg round hole if you wanted to put someone else in there. But right now, when you saw that bench before kickoff, as it has been, I would say, across the last number of games, the bench is very, very thin, Caroline. You're looking at it from a perspective of there is no one on that bench right now that can come on and be a game changer. Now, that will sound contradictory because obviously Mohamed Diamandi did exactly that at Parkhead.
Yeah.
But, and again, I never like speaking on behalf of the fans. I don't like doing it because, again, I would never consider myself to do that. But I, for one, certainly did not think to myself, after Hibs, Mohamed Diamandi will be a game changer for us. But it speaks a lot to your point of he's going to have to utilise some of these players. And as I say, we've seen better Rangers teams than this one, win leagues. And for me, it's about who can perform and contribute across the course of the season, because you're not going to get someone who will come in and bang in 50 goals up front, or will keep, 35 clean sheets, or, won't have injuries or suspensions. Everyone has to contribute, whether you are playing more regularly than the first team, or you are coming in off the bench, or alternatively, say you're new to the club and then you take a little bit of time to settle in, and then you look like you can get into a bit of form. So reflecting on all of that, I've kind of I come exactly to the same conclusion as you. I think, as I say, Rangers fans would have chased Tello Asgard out of Govan on Saturday afternoon, because we were so pissed off at how meagre his performance was against Celtic. And I think he deserved to come on, in terms of, like, I don't want to see him, because I still somehow think that there is something that he can give us. But right now, Danny Role has to play with the players who are available to him. He cannot play guys like Connor Barron 90 minutes every 3-4 days. It's just not feasible. He does have to be able to change over the rest of the midfield. He has problems in the flanks, because I don't think Gassama is playing that well. However, we would want to see Mikey Moore play more centrally. Right now, we struggle for the left-hand side. James Tavernier is just not fit enough any longer, and that's a age thing. It's not a lack of fitness thing through poor training, poor diet. It's an age thing, where he struggles to be able to get through the 90 at a decent, consistent level. We've obviously had, through injuries and players playing in AFCON, changes to the defence. So when you take all of that into account, Danny Role's actually done a very, very exceptional job in my book about having to lean into players. And even if he has to say to them, I don't need a 10 out of 10 performance from you, because you'll be replacing a guy who we either need to manage his minutes, or he might have taken a knock, and so therefore you're going to get your opportunity. What I need from you is to contribute. So if you take Chermiti in isolation, for example, that is probably a big part of the conversations that Roll and his staff have had with Chermiti, to say, be more physical, see what you can do to hold the ball up. Do not focus purely on scoring goals. You can contribute in other ways, and goals will come. And that's where he does have to use his game management well, in terms of when he's changing over subs, when he has to look at upcoming fixtures, all of that kind of thing as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. And we're impatient as fans. And actually, when it comes to someone like a Sterling, for example, I think, again, how we've managed him has been really good, because he's coming back from a long-term injury. And when he comes back and you see snippets of the old player that you loved so much, and what he brings to a squad in terms of strength and just that solidness, you want to play him as much as possible. But what we've done in kind of limiting his game time, giving him appropriate rest time between games, maybe leaving him out of a team for 1 week and allowing him to come back, is just exactly the right thing to do. We don't always have that luxury, and I felt in the past maybe we haven't, and we've maybe made a mistake that way. But I think Danny Role's doing the right thing of, actually, for the sake of the entire season, for the entire squad, you have to kind of temper your enthusiasm a little bit, and actually give players the time and space to develop or return from injury. Because you're right, we don't have much depth in the squad, and we are going to have to utilise some of the players that wouldn't be maybe your first choice on the team sheet. But if we are going to be in a title race, and the demands that brings on the first 11, you're going to need to change things up. And there will be injuries as well between now and the end of the season. I think you touched on it, and I'm sure we'll come into more detail, where you hope that we'll have a couple of additions at least in January. You'd think that, given that we've managed to somehow get ourselves back in a position where we're title contenders, the very least that the board should do for Roll is give him a couple of players to make that job a little bit easier, and actually give us more than just an outside chance of that happening. And there are, like you mentioned earlier, key areas where we need significant strengthening. Like, I think that up front, Chermiti has come into a little bit of form, but we can't expect too much from Chermiti. And looking to the bench with Miovski and Danilo, that there are limitations there, and you can't rely on that. What I do like about the current squad is that we are seeing goals coming from throughout the squad, and actually for Fernandes to be picking up the number of goals that he has is fantastic. But again, in addition to having goals coming from across the pitch and utilising set pieces, we need more of a killer threat, for example, up front. We need a guaranteed almost striker that can just work with potentially a Danilo or a Chermiti and just take some of that pressure off them. And hopefully that will be the case. I know we'll come on to talk about transfers and wish lists in a bit more detail, but that's definitely where my head's at after seeing these games. Delighted with the recent form and the uptick and the position we've managed to get ourselves back into. But, you know, let's keep that momentum going and let's give ourselves the best opportunity possible just by strengthening in key areas and giving that squad the lift it needs.
I mean, the squad for sure. And I think that, again, if I was Danny Rowe and I was walking into any conversations about transfer budget and about what could be made available to him, I think I've confidently staked my claim to say, I can get a tune out of some of these players, but I'm missing key parts of the band. And where I think it's interesting is we talk about how do we support the squad and how do we, well, most important, obviously, support Danny Rule within what he's attempting to do with the squad, is we need to bring in starters. I am a absolute fan of being able to try and get youth prospects. We've had varying degrees of success with that, and I'd love to be able to get another Alfredo Morelos or Hamza Igaman, being able to find them, being able to bring them in, develop them, and in some cases being able to try and take maximum value for them. I don't think that we can do that in this January window, Caroline. I think what we need to do is we need to be able to bring in starters who will be able to come in and make an immediate impression within the team. And I mean, and listen, I'm by no means saying that that's an easy thing to achieve, but at this stage, we won't get away with, right, well, let's just look at some, youth prospects from down south
Yeah.
or players who don't understand what I've discussed in previous shows around the pressure of playing for Rangers is an incredibly difficult thing to do. So you will need to look at the guy opposite you and say, do you understand what it is that I need from you? Do you know what role you're going to be coming in to perform here? Do you feel you're capable of doing that? And if he's not, then that's fine. But we need to have that conversation before we put pen to paper, rather than doing what we've done before, where we've seen talent coming in, but not fully understanding the picture of it or not appreciating it as much as they should do, and how difficult a task it is. And then before you know it, you've just spent good money after bad. That's what I think Danny Rowe has to be able to say to the board at the moment whenever we're talking about potential targets.
I 100% agree. I don't think the January window is the window where you want to be looking at development players and bringing in someone for a long-term prospect, because all the fans are looking for your starter, someone who can enhance the squad and improve us in certain key areas straight off the bat. That's all we're looking for. And anything less than that is going to be met with a bit of impatience and a bit of intolerance, which is not what a player needs either. It's certainly not what Danny Rowe needs. If you have, and thinking about Chermiti, bags of potentially bags of talent, probably still a little bit to be seen, but we're seeing flashes of that and elements of that so far. And, we heard Thelwell say that he's the model of a perfect player, kind of like undiscovered gem, if you like. And while that might be right, the way that he was implemented without having someone who could take some of that immediate pressure off. If, for example, Chermiti had been brought to Rangers and we had kept Dessers, who was, without being too sexy, still delivering goals and still helping you to get those 20 goals a season-ish that you need as part of your bread and butter, then it would have taken the pressure off and allowed him to be introduced and be developed and get used to life at Rangers and, in playing in Scotland in that more phased, natural way. Instead, we probably found ourselves expecting too much and throwing him in at the deep end to a certain extent where it wasn't great for either of us, for the team or for the player. So I think if there are any other opportunities to bring in, youth players like that, where you can develop them, it has to be in addition to, not instead of, players that can hit the ground running and enhance the team. When you see us, for example, being linked to a Penrice, for example, that's someone of I think probably the other category where they could come in and offer real value, has played in Scotland before, could step in and do a role straight away. That would be fantastic. That would be ideal, I think, for certain key positions that we need. And that's what I'm looking for. I think anything less than that, and we might be a bit disappointed with what goes on in January. The summertime, where you've got that extra time and you can develop off the field and in pre-season training matches, and you have all the time in the world to do that, is the ideal time to bring in a bit more of a project player. So yeah, let's wait and see what happens, Cammy. We don't always get what we want, and actually, as fans, we probably don't even recognise what's good for us, because I don't know that anyone was particularly excited about Danny Rowe, because of probably the merry-go-round of managers, as you mentioned before, that we'd had, and the back and forth around his appointment of, him turning it down and us not getting the managers that we wanted. It kind of arrived as a bit of a damp squib, his appointment. And yet here we are a couple of months later going, this might have just been exactly what we needed. And, all signs are good so far. So whilst I said all that about appointing players potentially in January and bringing new faces into the squad, I have to recognise as well that I want to be open-minded. So if the players that we do bring in don't quite meet the profile or the picture I had in my mind of who I wanted, I'm still going to try to be open-minded, because if there's one thing that football fans are, it's, not the best judges of character all the time.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair, because when you look at Rowe, what you can see from him is that he's had to do a lot of that confidence rebuild. He's had to do a lot of that belief reinstatement, if you can call it that. And it's interesting because, obviously we know the managerial hunt after the Russell Martin debacle led us to be able to go to guys like Steven Gerrard, and then Gerrard himself saying he's not a magician, and Rowe's accepted that now. What I personally like about Rowe is that he could, at this point in time, he could be turning around and saying, well, listen, this place was a car crash when I came in here. I've been able to steady the ship, and now I want to be able to continue to build on that. But look at what a great job I've done. He still continues to get frustrated about the things that we've discussed, not scoring enough goals, where he's not seen enough from certain players, and he's had to
Yes.
manage minutes, and he's made tough decisions. So whether or not you talk about dropping Diomande prior to Parkhead, bringing Asgard in, but then even during the game, taking Asgard off at half time, he will make those tough decisions. And that, again, I have to give him all credit for. And it's those incremental things that I think have contributed to our recovery. And again, what I think he's done is he's bought himself credit with the board to turn around and go, I have been working with one hand tied behind my back. Give me talent that I can bring into this squad and let me continue to build on what I've done already.
Yes,
Because,
and he's measured as well. Like, to talk about
yeah,
Parkhead there, I think any of us fans would have wanted to change 3 or 4 players at halftime. It was a car crash of a first half, and yet you've got someone who's mature and measured enough to make one key change and see how it plays out. And actually, it was exactly the right change and give us exactly the right result. Um, I'm not sure that another manager would have been quite so kind of tempered, and he's got that determination as well. So even hearing, and I know that this is sometimes just manager speak, but talking at the end of the Old Firm game, he's very he's quite almost like bashful about it. He doesn't want to talk too much about the victory. He doesn't want to, take too much of the plaudits. It's immediately next game. And while that is something which is just typical manager speak, I genuinely believe, because of the type of person we're starting to see that he is, he's just got that very determined, very methodical method of going about his business as a manager. So I believe that that's exactly how he'll be speaking with the players and not allowing themselves to get too far ahead.
yeah, absolutely. And I don't like ever putting guests on the spot, Caroline, but I am keen to put you in the position of Danny Roll. Where are you looking to strengthen? Where are your priority areas within this January window?
Yeah, I've hinted at it already, but definitely a proven striker, someone who can just do the kind of easy finishes, has good movement, and can create a little bit of space just to complement what we've got already, take a little bit of the pressure off the forwards that we have already, and just work well where we're lacking a little bit and just offer us that little bit more going forward. I think as well, defensively, I mean, I'm going to probably talk about all areas of the pitch here. Defensively, even last night against Aberdeen, there was a couple of moments where we're cut open quite easily, and with you know, without without even knowing how or why, we're we're kind of looking down if you're playing a better team at losing a goal or losing a lead or whatever it might be, and that gives me a little bit of fear going into the second half of the season. So for me, strengthening a little bit defensively is really important. Um, I think though, although I've just said that, for me, midfield options are particularly light. So if you are looking at the bench and what we can bring on, that's where I'd be going. I think Raskin's picked up a little bit of form, but he's been frustrating for the most part of the season. I think he's starting to enjoy his football a bit more, which I think shows in his performances, and that might be good for the second part of the season. But I would, and at the same, you touched on Diamande earlier. He was instrumental in that second half at Parkhead. But equally, we've seen the Diamande where you probably have to take him off at half time because it's not a game that he's doing well in or seems to really be up for. And actually, he looks more like getting himself sent off than adding anything valuable to the game. So if it's that Diamande that shows up on a game, I'd like to think that you could make a change to your midfield personnel, where you've got someone who is just a calming influence, can sometimes slow down play, pick out a pass, link play up. I sometimes feel that our midfield can look overwhelmed or overrun. Even last night, some of the space that you saw Aberdeen have in the midfield, the time and space, just once or twice that they had was a bit alarming. So I think a presence in that midfield would probably be my top priority, after probably a striker, and then defensively. I mean, all three of them are important, but if I were to rank them and you were to push me, that's probably how I'd rank them. What about
Yeah, I
you?
mean, it's an interesting one because I agree with you. I think outside of the goalkeeping position, almost every single one of them should be under review.
Yeah.
Um, the midfielder slot is interesting because at time of recording earlier on this afternoon, Rangers were linked with Toki Chukwueze, and I'm absolutely butchered that name of Sturm Graz.
I'm glad you said it, not me.
Yeah, who's 22, has 20 caps for the Danish under 21s. Played against both Rangers and Celtic. Was sent off for a tackle on Callum McGregor, which for me, I would sign him purely on the basis of that. But then I'm very old fashioned. But it's to your point. I think that we need to be able to strengthen that midfield because we've seen circumstances where, in fact, do you know what? I think I struggle genuinely to think of a 90-minute game where we've seen strong performances from all of our midfielders. I think that we've seen standout performances. You mentioned guys like Connor Barron, Raskan when he goes into the mood, I think can control and dictate games. Diamande goes from an absolute passenger against Hibs to being incredibly effective against Celtic to then, the second, I think the second half of the game against Aberdeen showed as well that it doesn't have to be harem scarum, it's all panicking, control the game, manage the final 30 minutes and just nothing daft, nothing simple, provides a wee bit of calm in there. Um, and for me, being able to strengthen that midfield, as you've mentioned, absolutely makes sense. there's obvious concerns from a striking perspective because we have obviously seen the upturn in Chermiti in terms of what he's contributed, whether it's been in terms of his physicality, being able to bring others into play, scoring goals himself. I genuinely, and again, I didn't get a chance to watch the full game back, but I struggled to think as to whether or not Miovski even touched the ball when he came on. So little was his impact. And I'm not talking about a guy who came on in the dying minutes in order to be able to. I mean, Miovski got 30 minutes. He got a third of the game to be able to try and come in, and I don't remember him doing anything at all with it. Danilo again, we can't really see anything from him. So I mentioned earlier on that from a selection perspective, we are in a little bit of a crisis, but we are also going to face exactly the same point if we get into injuries, if we get into suspensions, and these are all the bread and butter of a season. And it'll happen to other teams, obviously, so it's not just going to be a Rangers only problem. But what I think it does, Caroline, is that it emphasises that between ourselves, Hearts, and Celtic, the January window is whoever can come out of it the strongest in terms of the calibre of players that they're signing. And I'm not saying, by the way, that you make that assessment, the first week in February, but what I'm saying is how you're able to bring those players in and how they are then able to contribute immediately. Some may take a month or so to be able to come in. We cannot put ourselves into an expectation of thinking if we buy 5 players and as much as we want them to be fit, ready to go, etc., we're not going to get 10 out of 10 performances from these guys that we bring in every single week from now until the end of the season. It just doesn't work like that. But it is key that for me, in terms of being able to set up for the second half of the season, whoever buys well now puts themselves in the driving seat to win the league.
Yes, and I think what Roll's done is give us that breathing space to allow any new additions to come into the squad, come into the potential starting 11 without panic stations. So I know that probably a month or two ago, we're looking at January window and going, what state are we going to be in at the point we can finally make additions to the squad? Are we going to get there to a point where we're not so beaten down and out of contention that, there's not really any point in kind of improving the squad? We're actually at a position now where we're doing okay. Now it's fragile and there are still lots of concerning elements about our squad and play. However, bringing someone in and giving them just a little bit of time and space to adjust and understand their teammates, understand their role, take instructions from Roll and his coaching staff. It's not panic station. Someone's not coming in, for another player in the squad and replacing them straight off the bat and expected to do X, Y, Z. Actually, because we've got ourselves on a bit of an even keel, someone can be introduced in a far more controlled way and hopefully a far more successful way. So that's one thing that I'm really grateful for and really thankful to Danny Roll for. And it just means that although we do need strengthening, and we've clearly stated all the different ways where I think the squad needs strengthened, it's also not panic stations because we're thin on the ground in terms of numbers and certainly on quality additions that we can bring on. But I think we've still got the slight luxury or ability to introduce any new faces in a sensible way, which is good. And you're right. I think depending on who does best in the January window, it'll have a massive effect on how things are looking come May time.
Well, let's talk about some of those selections as we look ahead towards this bizarre double header that we have against Aberdeen, because obviously we got to Pittodrie on Sunday afternoon. Not confirmed. So again, I want to caveat that. But rumours coming out, Caroline, that we could have some very key injuries: Mikey Moore, Dijon Sterling, and also Connor Barron. All of whom, again, some very, very strong performances in there from the Aberdeen game, and it's a tough one in terms of how key those players could be for it. But then at the same point, you're playing up against, and this is why, although it's a bizarre situation because we're obviously playing the same team back to back times in the league, we could get into a position where, because we have played them, because we understand the physicality of it, we're not, or we certainly shouldn't be at least, surprised that when we go up to Pittodrie, I think that we will face probably a hungrier Aberdeen who will be keen to uh, show themselves at home to be able to take it. They will obviously have all of their fans, as always, thinking it's a cup final because it's a game against Rangers. Um, but by and large, what we need to be able to do is exactly what we did at Ibrox on Tuesday night, which is don't get embroiled in the physicality of it. Don't get pissed off at amateurish refereeing, as we saw from Nick Walsh on Tuesday, where fouls go unpunished. You know you're going to have to play against a lot of that. You have to be able to stand up to it. And as much as we talk about this, probably more so, I think, when we talk about Old Firm games, I actually think that Sunday is really going to be all about continuing to win your individual battles and go toe to toe with them. If we have to go with a midfield, for example, of Raskan, Diamandi, and Asgard, I think everyone listening to this would turn around and say, "Well, I think Asgard is a weak link in there, based on what you've seen from in the last couple of games." However, you've got to turn around now to tell Asgard and say you need to make sure that you contribute towards this. Um, Again, Sterling could be a problem. We hope that, again, he's fit. If we had a fully fit, back four, then I would do exactly what we did at Parkhead and play Sterling ahead of Tavernier. But at this point, we're going to have to say to Tav, look, do what you can. Again, you have to contribute. He has been a huge servant to Rangers, so I'm not turning this into a Tav bashing session. I'm not. And as I say, I am in no way blaming him for his current state because, it's age catches up with us all. Moore will obviously be a miss if he can't make it. So again, it's coming back to some of these players who haven't featured as regularly and saying to, even if it's guys like if he decides that he wants to play Chermite through the middle, and even if he wants to put Majowski on the left hand side, say to him, look, you just have to show me what you can do. I'm not asking for you to, again, get there and score a hat trick or keep a clean sheet and, a 10 out of 10 performance. It's just about getting the 3 points and dealing with a side that might have been hampered by those injuries.
Yeah, I agree with what you say there, Cammy. And I know that playing Aberdeen back to back and seeing how they were last night, which wasn't terribly impressive, and their form also suggests that. I agree that it will be a different beast up at Pittodrie on Sunday. We have a decent amount of downtime between now and then, and I hope that some of the injury risks actually don't end up being that way, and we can utilize some of those players, if not for the entire match, then for some of the match, because what we then have is a full week before Annan where you could potentially rest players for a decent amount of time and maybe leave them out of the Annan starting 11 or squad altogether if they've really given absolutely everything and maybe just stretched a tiny bit too far. But the importance of keeping up that momentum, like we touched on before, is so important. And I think really Aberdeen, in the form that they're in, we need to be winning those games. Winning those games against that kind of team is so important, because really it's the other games where we might struggle a bit more. But realistically, we should be taking all points on Sunday, even though it's going to be harder than it was last night. And even with those players amiss, based on what we saw yesterday, I would still hope that if we were to have to bring in reinforcements, although, like we've said, there's some concerns there and there's a potential dip in quality, I'd still hope that we have enough in the tank to get the 3 points. And like I say, if we can only maybe get 45 minutes out of someone, then I think we should. I think we have to, given the fixture we've got following it, take that gamble.
Yeah, and again, I'm going to contradict myself here, because what I'm looking at now is, you're right. If we get through Pittodrie and get 3 points with that, then we take a little bit of a break. Now, if someone within that title race was to drop points, then they're going to have a week away from the league to sit and ruminate on that and get the Scottish Cup fixtures out the way. We've obviously got European games, so of that lot. And then one eye, I think, is on Easter Road at the beginning of February. And this is where I would be saying to that squad, even if you haven't featured as much as you would like, through varying reasons, whatever else you want to be able to say, then Annan is your opportunity. Ludogorets could be your opportunity, based on how things are going at the moment. And then, as we've kind of discussed, it could be the case that we'll get some of the new intake. Fingers crossed, we have a new intake by that stage, to come in and contribute towards that as well. There's a couple of good games in there, I think, Caroline, of differing levels of opponent, where we could help get these guys bedded in before we really properly get back to what I think would be our next biggest test. We play Dundee at Ibrox in the last weekend in January, but eyes will shift towards Easter Road at the beginning of February. So there's games, as you say, in there that could work in our favour in terms of how we need to manage some of those knocks, those injuries, rotate around the squad a good wee bit and give players a rest who need a rest.
Yeah, and I do think another incentive for our American overlords to maybe loosen the purse strings and bring some new faces in January is games like Ludogorets and Annan probably aren't, for your people that haven't bought into packages or are signed up for continuous credit card schemes, aren't fixtures that you're thinking, oh, I'm definitely going out on a Friday night when it's freezing to go watch Rangers v Annan. However, if there's a new face and an exciting addition to the squad that you might think, oh, you know what, it's worth going along to Ibrox tonight to see this player maybe get introduced and getting a few minutes on the pitch, that and the potential revenue that they might get from additional ticket sales hopefully encourages them to sooner rather than later make some additions to the squad, because otherwise those two games aren't really that attractive in the calendar of fixtures, are they? So that would be another benefit to bringing in some players. But you're right, in terms of Hibs, that's definitely looking at the next big game, big important game. Obviously, with the European, I guess, campaign as it is, nothing too exciting about that fixture, unfortunately. And I'm sure people going to Porto will be excited about it. But again, it's not one that I'm terribly excited for. The fact that we're potentially back in a title race means that I am looking at those domestic games far more closely than anything else.
Well, we will unpack all of those games that I've mentioned, whether it's Scottish Cup, the League, or Europe, on our Patreon site, which is patreon.com/heart and hand. Feel free to jump on over there. You will get all of your Rangers news, breaking news as well, whenever we have some updates in the transfer market, either with players going or players coming in. And you can get Rangers content from only a couple of quid a month. It's an absolute steal. Thank you to our executive producers, Mike Lee and Paul Myers. Thank you to you all for listening. Hope you've really enjoyed it. I absolutely have. And Caroline, as I say, I was feeling good, but you've just continued to make me feel even better. So thank you so much for coming on this week.
Thank you for inviting me, Cammy, and let's hope this positivity carries on to the weekend.
100%. David will be back with Flagship on Monday to unpack the Aberdeen game on Sunday, and I'll be back with you next week as we get ready to take on Annan in the Scottish Cup on Friday night at Ibrox. Thanks everyone for listening, and we'll speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.